Hello, my name is Dakota Diesel, and welcome to another episode of Film of the Year, and welcome to the start of the 1890s. If you have not seen the last video of the series, or even the intro to how this series is going to work, make sure you do watch those videos before watching this, as we're now going to talk and review some movies. In the last video, we covered how the idea of motion pictures would soon become a thing. From the help of early entertainment and optical illusion toys like the magic lantern to the zoetrope, to the invention of the camera and how people like Muybridge and Mary would use the invention to make motion out of photographs, to finally Louis Lee Prince's first shot at creating a camera with the purpose of creating a film. Now that we're entering into the 1890s, we're going to start to see movies slowly becoming a new form of entertainment to the public, and we'll also see throughout the 1890s and the 1900s of directors and filmmakers working on different styles and techniques that'll help transform movies to the way that they are today. Because of Prince's mysterious disappearance in the last video, it was still going to take some time before the public could finally see a movie playing in action. But luckily they didn't have to wait for too long, because another inventor and his assistant would soon make a movie camera and a movie device to show these films to the public around the same time that Prince was going to show off his latest creation to the world. That film device would be known to the world as the Kinetoscope. The story of the Kinetoscope begins with a young boy. The young boy that had vision and helped design the Kinetoscope was Thomas Edison. Born on February 11th, 1847, Edison moved with his family from Milan, Ohio to Port Huron, Michigan, where he spent most of his childhood days educating himself, with the help of his mother, Nancy Edison. At a very young age, Edison loved to learn and discover new things, and would always find ways to innovate and experiment on certain subjects. At the age of 12, Edison was able to convince his parents to let him take a job as a news butcher, selling newspapers and candy at a train station that goes from Port Huron to Detroit. With the money Edison was making, he used it to buy electrical equipment, chemical experiments, and a printing press. Whenever Edison would have some free time, he would experiment with the chemicals, and he would set up his own small newspaper called the Grand Trunk Herald, where he would publish up-to-date articles. His small publishing business would soon become his first big success in the business world. Edison would then receive another breakthrough when in 1862, a 15-year-old Edison would become a hero in saving the life of a station master's 3-year-old son, Jimmy McKinsey, from a runaway train. Very grateful for his bravery, the father, J.U. McKinsey, taught Edison how to operate the telegraph. Now before we go further, it should be noted that Edison started to lose much of his hearing by the time he reached 12. His deafness was due to the scarlet fever, as well as an untreated ear infection during his youth that would later cause Edison to be completely deaf in one ear, while he would barely hear out of the other ear. Luckily for Edison, his handicap wouldn't be much of an issue because, at the time, the Morse codes for the telegraph would be recorded on a strip dash of paper. So all Edison had to do was to use the paper as reference when sending and receiving messages. Soon, his training would lead Edison to work as a telegraph operator in the winter of 1862, and continue for about 5 years, traveling around the Midwest to sub for other telegraph operators while they go and fight in the American Civil War. However, the telegraphs would soon start to be equipped with sounding keys, which in turn meant that the telegraphers would have to read the messages through the clicks. Obviously, this would make it difficult for someone like Edison to continue working under the new technology, so he would later resign from his job somewhere around January in 1869. Before Edison resigned, though, he used much of his free time reading and studying not only the telegraph, but also electrical devices in general. He became so interested in the field that he wanted to not only invent new products, but to also improve upon existing inventions too. This would include improving a telegraph to where the device would transmit 2 messages simultaneously on one wire and a printer that converted electrical signals to letters. When he showed his invention off, railway tycoon Jake Gould offered $100,000 in cash, stock, and bond to Edison, about $2,603,482.46 in 2023. With the money, Edison moved to Midland Park in Middlesex County, New Jersey, and built an industrial research lab in 1876. Filled with a couple of employees, Edison would soon become one of the many known inventors during the time period of the Second Industrial Revolution, and he would file a lot of patents. Like I said earlier, most of Edison's inventions were approved upon works of other inventions that were known at the time. For example, when Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone on March 10, 1876, Edison would improve the microphone part with a carbon microphone for better sound and a stronger current. This would lead Edison to develop a carbon button transmitter that would be used with both a telephone microphone and speakers for almost a century. Another well-known improvement Edison is known for is his improvement on the light bulbs. While there were plenty of light bulbs being made and used during the mid-19th century, the problem was both the high cost and that early light bulbs were known to burn out quicker than today's bulbs. After Edison formed the Edison Electric Light Company sometime in 1878, he worked with a group of researchers in his lab to develop the best type of grass or cane that could produce longer running electricity. It was eventually discovered and accepted that carbonized mat booms were the answer for a better current. When Edison publicly demonstrated his light bulb in Midland Park on December 31st, 1879, he was met with lots of praises, and a couple of people showed interest in his light bulb, including people like President of Oregon Railroad and Navigation Company Henry Villard, where he requested Edison's assistance in installing his electric lights for Villard's new steamboat, the Columbia. And most of us know where this is going. Edison would soon become known for his direct current, as well as competing with his former employer Nikola Tesla over Tesla's alternating current. But since this series is focused on films, we won't spend too much time talking about this side of his career. But you can always check out other videos if you're interested in learning more on the subject. What we will talk about though is one last invention that Edison made before going into the filming business, and this invention will play a big role for movies. And that invention is Edison's phonograph. Again, while Edison wasn't the first person to invent a sound recording device, he was the first to invent a device that would not only record sound, but would also play back the sound that has been recorded. Edison began coming up with the idea for the phonograph sometime between May and July of 1877, with a piece of tin foil wrapped around the brass cylinder with two needles being placed onto the machine, one for recording and the other for playing back audio. Edison was speaking to the microphone, reciting "Mary Had a Little Lamb" onto the device. The sound and the vibrations from the microphone would be captured and recorded onto the tinfoil with the first needle. Once Edison was done, he started cranking the machine, and the second needle would do just as Edison intended and would actually play back the recording to him. Very pleased with the outcome, Edison announced his invention on November 21st, 1877 in several newspapers, and gave a demonstration that same year a few days later on November 29th. The demonstration was met with such high praise that Edison soon became the Wizard of Midland Park. Even U.S. President Rutherford B. Hayes loved the device when he was being presented with it. Although the phonograph was a huge success for Edison at the time, Edison would lose interest in the device and put off trying to improve upon it for a few more years. It wasn't until other inventors like Alexander Graham Bell, the person responsible for the telephone, started the early steps to improve Edison's phonograph to replace the tinfoil recordings for wax-coated cardboard cylinders for better marketing. This would make Edison start improving the phonograph machine during the 1880s. It was also late into this decade that Edison would make another device that would also garner him some fame, and this invention is the main subject for today's video. Before we talk about today's device, we're going to briefly mention one of Edison's employees, as he is responsible for making this device possible to begin with. Enter William Kennedy Lorraine Dixon, also known as William K. L. Dixon, born on August 3rd, 1860. Dixon and his mother and two sisters moved from France into the United States around 1879 when Dixon was 19. Before settling in the States, Dixon asked Edison if he could work at his laboratory. Eventually, Dixon was hired by Edison around 1883 and worked with Edison for several years. One day, on February 25th, 1888, a famous photographer was at Orange, New Jersey giving lectures about the motion of humans and animals using his photographs and the Kinetoscope device. That famous person was none other than Edward Muybridge, the person responsible for the Horse in Motion project, which we talked about in the last video. It's possible that either or both Edison and Dixon were at attendance while the lecture was taking place, because later that same year in October, Edison filed a caveat for a future invention that would, as Edison put it, do for the eye what the phonograph does for the ear. Edison would later file a second caveat around March of 1889, where he named the future motion picture device the kinetoscope. Kineto meaning movement, and scopes meaning to view. Edison tasked Dixon to invent the kinetoscope. Dixon, along with another one of Edison's employees, Charles Brown, would begin developing what the kinetoscope device would look like. Originally, Edison proposed a 1/32 inch wide recorded photographs placed directly onto a drum-like shape, where one would be made out of opaque material for positive images, and another out of glass for the negatives. Both would be coated in collodion to provide a photographic base. However, that was soon quickly changed when English photographer John Carbud began developing celluloid films around 1888, and it would quickly become a far better way to record film. So Dixon would place an order for the film strip. When Dixon got the film strips he wanted, he began making a camera that would capture the motion using these film strips. The result would be a crude-looking, motor-powered camera known as the kinetograph. Being the first camera of its kind, the kinetograph was very heavy and static, and would require a lot of light. Using the 35mm film strip, the camera would capture the movement with the synchronized shutter powered by an electric motor. The film strip will have sprocket holes placed onto the sprocket system, so that when the camera was rolling, the sprocket system would pause so that the camera could capture the picture and place it onto the film strip before the camera would roll again and continue until the film process was done. This process was made possible thanks to Edison's European trip starting around August of 1889, where he traveled around the countries for 2 months. And during his stay, he would later meet French scientist and chronophotographer Etienne Jules Mouret, who we also briefly covered in our last video. He is the person responsible for the chronophotographic gun that can take 12 consecutive photos in a second using a type of film strip. Edison would be shown a demonstration with this device and would leave a big influence on him when developing the kinetoscope. 2 other possible influences for the kinetoscope would be shown at the Exposition Universelle in Paris, where the recently built Eiffel Tower will be the main attraction. Anyways, one of the possible influences would be another early motion picture device known as the electroid tachoscope, invented by German photographer and chronophotographer Audemars Anzu. Much like Muybridge and Mary, Audemars was also known for his instantaneous pictures and also took up chronophotography around 1885. The quality of Audemars' pictures is said to be higher than those of Muybridge, and much like Muybridge, Audemars wanted to invent a device that would record the actions of the pictures he took. So around 1886, he built a machine with a 1.5 meter wheel that had glass plate photographs attached to the circumference. When working, the pictures would be illuminated behind a fast section of electric flashes, synchronized in a geyser tube, also known as a gas tube. The wheel would be rotated via a hand crank at 30 frames per second, where up to 4 people could watch the images moving on a milk glass screen wall in a small darkened room. Audemars presented his first model at the Ministry of Culture in Berlin between March 19th to 21st in 1887, where it would become a huge success across the community. Audemars would travel across Europe and America between the late 1880s and early 1890s, revealing his invention, and it's very possible that Edison was among one of those that had the chance to view the device during the exposition in Paris, which by the time that Edison returned from his trip, he would file another patent caveat around November 2nd, 1890, describing more detail on the kinetoscope having flexible film strip with sprockets to make the mechanical conveyance more smooth and reliable. Now, there is a debate on when the lab began working with film strips and when the first motion picture was captured. Some historians say that Dixon began working with cardboard celluloid sheets around mid-1889, and would do a test recording around June of 1889. However, other historians speculate that Dixon and the rest of the crew were still in the middle of experimenting with the camera and the peep show machine at that time. Plus, Dixon later found that cardboard celluloid film was still too stiff to be used as a film strip for the camera. And by the time Dixon was making his prototype machine of the kinetoscope, other companies like the Eastman Company, responsible for the Kodak camera, began developing a more flexible camera roll. And according to Dixon himself, he attended Eastman's demonstration of his new product, and was even given a roll by a representative to use as an experiment with the prototype, and Dixon found a much better result when he used the roll for filming around November of 1890, which in turn convinced both Edison and Dixon to place more orders for the rolls. The films in question that were being used for testing would be known as the Monkey Shine films, with 3 being made to experiment with the film strips. While the films didn't show the clearest results, with a little more experimenting, Dixon and his new chief assistant, William Heinze, would soon develop a working kinetoscope around early 1891. The new kinetoscope would be made of wood, which had a cabinet made to house 3/4 inch of film strip, which ran through a series of spindles. Above the film cabinet was a magnifying glass, in which people can view the film when bending down, as the film would run right before their very eyes. When the prototype for the kinetoscope was finished, Edison invited about 150 members of the National Federation of Women's Clubs to see the latest invention in action on May 20th, 1891. The film being shown to the ladies would be known as Dixon's Greeting, to which Dixon would take off his hat and bow to the ladies. The women were impressed with what they saw, and with this, Edison filed 3 patents, one for the kinetoscope, another for the kinetograph, and one for exhibiting photographs of moving objects. The one for the kinetoscope would be granted around 1893. With the success of the prototype kinetoscope, Dixon and his team would work on finalizing the device while making some changes. One of the new added features to the kinetoscope was a coin operating slot, in which after you put in your own coin, usually somewhere between 10 to 25 cents, the film would start playing. But the most significant change came with the film strip becoming 1 inch wide by 3/4 of an inch high, with 4 perforations on each side with 35 millimeters. This would later become the basic formatting for films that we still use to this day. As the kinetoscope was getting closer to being released to the public, Edison put in plans to construct the world's first film studio, known as the Black Maria. Construction of the building began sometime in December of 1892 on the grounds of the Edison's laboratories at West Orange, New Jersey, and was quickly completed on February 1st, 1893, at the cost of $637.67, about $21,028.73 in 2023. The Black Maria will have a studio covered in black tar paper, so that it would be much easier to see the actors performing in front of the camera. The building would also contain a flip-up sunroof and a rotating turntable under the building to turn around throughout the day to follow the sunlight. With the Black Maria, actors would be placed in front of the camera to perform usually everyday acts, whether that be boxing, pretending to be blacksmiths, dancing, and even well-known performers would be captured on film, such as people from the Buffalo Bills show like sharpshooter Annie Oakley, the strongman Eugene Sandlow, and many others. With the final version of a working kinetoscope finally completed, the team originally planned to show their latest invention at the World's Columbian Exposition held from May 1st to October 30th, 1893 in Chicago, Illinois. And for a while, people did believe that they saw the actual device at the fair. However, that was not the case. What they most likely saw at the fair was Audemars' electroid tachoscope, which had already been produced in the US during the kinetoscope's development. Instead, the kinetoscope would finally make its first public appearance at the Brooklyn Institution of Arts and Science on May 9th, 1893. With the background of how the kinetoscope came to be, let's take a look at the films and see how well they hold up today. Now, this review session is going to be slightly different than how I normally review movies. I'm still going to add my own personal thoughts on the film, but I'm going to give 2 separate ratings for each movies we'll be covering. One rating will be my own personal rating, and the other rating will be a collective rating of sorts. Basically, depending on what your guys' opinions are on a certain movie, I'll take those thoughts and give them their own ratings based on how well the movie will do for a general audience. If you guys would like to be a part of this rating process, all you have to do is be on the lookout for when I host live streams for the movies we'll be watching, and once the movie is over, you just have to let me know what you thought of the movie yourself. Simple as that. Anyway, one thing I should mention is that for the first 2 decades, most of the movies that we're going to cover are going to be very short, and the plots will be simple. We will explain why feature films weren't a thing just yet, but for now, keep in mind that most of the films are going to be somewhere between 15 to 30 minutes. And you might think with something like the Kinetoscope films that it would be hard to review these films, seeing how short and simple they are. But there is something to be said about these films, especially when comparing them to how we treat not just movies, but video entertainment to this day. In fact, some of the things the Kinetoscope is known for is something that's still mainstream today. Seeing people doing simple things is something we still do with the rise of YouTube Shorts, TikTok, and other short formatted videos. Even looking at these films through a modern lens, it's easy to see how the kinetoscope became mainstream for the time being. When looking at these films, it's clear that Edison and his team were focused on making sure these films would entertain anyone watching, and they have different varieties too. From people doing simple stuff like pretending to be blacksmiths to a barber, from silly comedy bits like 2 cats boxing each other, or this scene where a dude smashes another dude with some kind of pot or vase, and they chase each other. These machines definitely had a lot going for them, and it's easy to see people at the time spending a couple of minutes just watching the latest film in action. And the fact that right away some of the well-known performers like Annie Oakley or a group of African Americans from the Passion Show took part in being filmed for the Kinetoscope, again, just speaks volumes about how much influence this machine had for the time. That being said though, it is sometimes tough to go back to watch films like this when, like I said, we've updated and really improved a lot with not only how we film, but how we edit and even improved the quality compared to 1893. And while these films might have been fun to watch for both historical reasons and to kill some time, when compared to how we produce short films today, it is a bit tough to recommend these type of films to a modern audience. Now me personally, being a historian buff and such, I do love watching these short films, seeing the people of the time and how different culture was back then compared to today. And some of these are still entertaining, and it's easy to see what is still popular today, even after many years later. But I would be lying if I said I don't get bored after watching these films way too many times. And the fact that there were so many feature films on this device, while it's good for a marketing standpoint, it does start to get stale after a while when you realize all these films are so very short, and it's easy to not watch these films after seeing them so many times. With that said though, I still enjoy watching these short films. Even with the short runtime they had, the team still made it their mission to make their audience entertained with whatever they could think of, and I say they succeeded well. So, with my personal opinion, I think it's fair to rate these Kinetoscope films a 7 out of 10. But now let's see what the others have to say about the Kinetoscope, and what's the general opinion on these films from a modern standpoint. Well, based on the reactions from the live streams, it is clear most of you have shared the same views that I did, in that the films were good for the time, and that they are still interesting to watch from a historical point, but definitely these films have shown their age as to be expected. While the novelty and the impact the Kinetoscope has made makes this invention worth visiting, even back then there are only so many films to see in this machine that the fun does start to wear off, and you want to start looking for new and better short films that are out there. So with this part of the review, I'm going to give one of these 3 ratings based on what you viewers have thought of the movie overall. Own it, basically meaning that this is a much-watched movie, and if you can find a way to own a copy, definitely get it. Skim it, meaning that if you're interested or curious to see if you might like this movie, either watch a scene or 2, or even a trailer if you can find one, and decide if this movie is for you or not. Or skip it, which is actually what it sounds like, in that this movie is probably not worth your time watching. So for the Kinetoscope, based on the feedback from the live streams, I think it's fair to give this invention a skim it. Honestly, because these films are short, they are at least easy to get into. If you're interested in looking at the very first motion films and see how far we've gotten, they are definitely worth the watch, and some of them are still entertaining in their own right. So with that, I think we can safely say that the Kinetoscope definitely owns a spot in the film history, as without this, who knows where movies might have headed. And there's mine and the viewer's modern view on the Kinetoscope. When the Kinetoscopes were released, they quickly became a smash hit. After the public demonstration in Brooklyn, Edison and his team quickly worked in creating more Kinetoscopes and creating films at their Black Maria studio. The first public Kinetoscope parlor would be built and opened to the public on April 14, 1894 by the Holland brothers in New York City, where 10 Kinetoscopes in a row of 5 would be displayed, charging people between 25 to 50 cents to view all 10 films, about $8.63 to $17.26 in 2023. And would quickly become a big commercial success for everyone involved with the machine. So much so that by June 1st of that same year, more Kinetoscope parlors would be open across America, and even in other places like halls or in hotel lobbies, you could find a Kinetoscope machine inside there. Edison's company would charge $250 to distributors wanting to have a Kinetoscope inside their own building, and would sell $10 for each film. Around the first 11 months after the Kinetoscope's introduction to the public, the Edison company generated a profit of $85,000, about $2,933,458.72 in 2023. The Kinetoscope would also see success abroad, mostly in the European market, but others would take notice, and some would examine and experiment with the machine, which in turn would lead to some making their own film device to compete with Edison. We'll talk about those inventions in the near future. There's no doubt that the Kinetoscope played an important role in getting the industry started. This machine will continue to be a household name during the mid to late 1890s. We will talk a little more about the Kinetoscope's lifespan later in the series. As for the team that work on the Kinetoscope, such as Edison and Dixon, their story into the film business hasn't come to an end just yet, so we will hear from these two again in the near future. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching this history on the Kinetoscope. If you enjoyed this episode and have learned something, don't forget to hit that like button. Click subscribe for the next episode of Film of the Year. And don't forget, if you would like to be a part of the series and voice your opinion on these films, you can always join the live streams where I host a watch party on the movies being chosen for the series. And if you guys have any movies or shows you would like for me to review, list them in the comments below. And if you like Let's Plays, then I have a gaming channel for you to check out as well. This is Diesel saying thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next episode of Film of the Year. Take care.